Your name was added to the list since you couldn't get on and you drove over here, okay? He's not in yet? Where is he, Nick? Has he gotten in?
I don't know, I can't see these, I'm not gonna zoom, I'm gonna post it on I care about Ferguson.
So you want to change the way for.
He wanted to hear all the questions, so.
Can you send an email? That's not what you sent to Councilman Williams.
You want me to go on the Zoom?
No, whatever information you sent to Councilman Williams, if you could send it to him, because he.
I sent it to Willie and John.
Oh.
Yeah, I sent it to Hampton, yeah.
There we go. We have, John is on. Is David on?
Yeah.
Okay, we ready to get started. Would you call the first person, please?
Mildred Clines.
Good evening, council and residents. Thank you all for showing up today. I appreciate that. Also, thank you, Councilman Cassoff, for removing the occupancy permit bill that was out there to change the occupancy permit and to eliminate that. So I thank you, appreciate you for removing that because most of the residents didn't want that. Bill 7302. And I would like to start off saying 51% of the housing stock in Ferguson is rental property. And my comments I'm going to put in the form of questions. Shouldn't all term rentals, Airbnbs, be considered in the same category? All short-term rentals and Airbnbs, shouldn't they be considered in the same category? My sisters and I recently rented a short-term rental Airbnb at the going rate, which we paid for was $3,500 for 4 days. Here are my questions. Shouldn't there be a limit on how many days in the year that you should be able to rent these Airbnbs and short rentals out? If not, shouldn't we limit what happens to the sense of community? If Airbnbs are allowed to go on for 365 days, what happened to our sense of community where we know our neighbors, who lives next door, who lives across the street? You know, we won't have that sense of community. What if Mike Palmer, who sits on this council, who recently said, I own over 100 houses, decide to turn his rental properties into Airbnbs and short-term rentals? What would that look like? Airbnbs and short-term rentals all over the city. Shouldn't Airbnb short-term rentals be taxed at a higher rate? I'm asking, should Airbnb and short-term rentals be taxed at a higher rate? My next question, why would the city allow Airbnb short-term rentals without receiving some financial benefit as well?
Say that one again, please.
Say it again.
Yes, ma'am.
Why would the city allow Airbnbs, short-term rentals, without receiving some financial benefit as well? Should there be a list on how many Airbnbs rentals in a particular neighborhood? This bill states the short-term Airbnbs occupancy shall be for 1 year. The bill states the short-term Airbnb occupancy shall be for 1 year. And that's fair. For obvious reasons, shouldn't the application for occupancy be renewed annually, along with an internal and external inspection? Shouldn't the owner reside 30 miles or 30 minutes from the Airbnb in case code enforcement or the police request some assistance, and not the 60 miles or an hour away that's listed in this bill? These are very important questions. Why should owners produce private information to any representative of the city? Shouldn't the information listed here, such as the address, the telephone number, a state ID, only be given to law enforcement officers or code enforcement officers?
Can you slow down for just a quick second? That one, go back and read that one again, because I'm not quite understanding what your concern is.
Okay. Why should the owners produce private information to any representative from the city?
In relation to what?
They have
In comparison to what?
in comparison, they come up to a problem. If there's a problem at the Airbnb and someone other than the police or code enforcement come, this bill is basically saying any representative of the city, that this owner has to produce that information to them. And I'm saying that this information should be limited to the police or code enforcement.
But would,
Not some rogue council person that's showing up. That's what I'm just saying.
let her get finished,
Well, we're having a discussion though, right, Mayor?
but she has the floor.
No, I know, I'm not taking that away from
Okay.
you, I'm just trying to understand a little bit more. I guess the thing that I'm gonna ask you is, in that particular section, would it be more conducive for you if it clarified exactly what people, so,
I know. Okay,
I'm sorry, Ms. Kleins, go ahead. Apparently, my counsel
Well,
thinks
I
I've
was just
interrupted.
saying that, the owner of the property, if there's a problem, they should be no further away than like 30 minutes. 30 minutes, they should be able to get to that property, not an hour away. And then also, if there's an issue with a particular property or Airbnb, I don't think anybody from the city, other than officers or code enforcement or police, should be able to say, let me see your ID.
Got it.
That's basically what I'm saying on that.
anything else, Ms. Klein?
In short term, in Airbnb's occupancy, if an Airbnb occupancy permit is revoked or suspended, my question is for how long? And when that period of time has passed, can they reapply or are they permanently suspended? That's a question. Shouldn't there be a hefty fine assessed every time a homeowner fails to obtain an occupancy permit for an Airbnb? Like $500 violation to deter them from ignoring the ordinance. Shouldn't all Airbnbs be registered with the city of Ferguson? If you decide to run an Airbnb, shouldn't you register that Airbnb, that property with the city of Ferguson? I only got a couple more. for safety and security of the owner and their property, do we really, or do the person really have to list their property on two major sites? This bill says two major sites. The property's address needs to be listed there. And I understand a lot of times for safety and security reasons, owners don't list it because there are a lot of people who just look for that and they're going breaking those places. But once you secure a contract with the owner that you're gonna rent that property, that's when they usually will release the address.
That's how it's always worked.
In my case, I was given an area, location, along with pictures of the property. The owner didn't give me an address until we had secured the contract. Shouldn't residents be able to call City Hall? Now, I'm talking about the neighbors now. Shouldn't they be able to call City Hall to find out if a particular property on their block next door to them is an Airbnb or short-term rental? And should owners be required to have adequate trash receptacles? Because you got a lot of people coming in. And if we allow short-term rentals in the city, then we should allow Airbnbs as well. And my last question, do we have short-term rentals currently in the city?
Okay, Miss Clines, before you leave, who are you directing your question to? The
Most of
city
these-
manager?
Actually, most of these I'm directing to the city council because you all
Okay.
are the ones that's gonna make the decision.
Okay,
But with the, yeah,
thank you.
So Mayor, can I ask?
Thank you. Councilman Kassoff has the floor. He raised his hand first.
Sure.
Okay, Mildred, thanks for your comments. I think we mostly agree and the bill mostly covers your concerns, but I want to address them directly. And that's my notes. I took a whole page of notes from you. So let me deal with a few of the easy ones first. There isn't a requirement that people list on those major sites. What the bill says is that the city staff will look at those two sites periodically to see whether there's people advertising Airbnbs that haven't registered them. You can list on any site you want. You can list on no site at all if you want to. Should residents be able to call City Hall to see if a property is an Airbnb? Absolutely. I've got no problem with that, and that's gonna be public information. Every residence has to have trash service, so that shouldn't be a problem. And yeah, they should be registered with the city. That's why I put this bill in. Right now, there is no Airbnb registration or short-term rental registration with the city at all. And I think that's a problem because we should know. You shouldn't have to guess whether something is a short-term rental or a drug house or something else. You should be able to find out and so, yeah, I agree with that. Owners do not have to give private information on the rentals to the city generally, only if there's a problem. And that problem would be the police coming, even code enforcement's not dealing with tenants. Code enforcement is dealing with the building, right? If there's a problem with the people that are staying there, that's when the police are getting involved. And as far as some rogue city council member going and trying to demand driver's licenses from people, that's a violation of the charter. That's a staff job. And I find out as a member of this council is trying to demand driver's licenses from people, I'm gonna be the one sponsoring the impeachment. So that's absolutely forbidden. 30 versus 60 miles, that's a judgment call. I said 60 miles because when I looked at other communities around here, that's generally what they allow. 30 miles does not get you from here to Wentzville. It gets you to O'Fallon. So are we gonna require somebody who lives in Wentzville or Wright City to pay a real estate company that's within 30 miles? You know, we got somebody who lives in Florida right now who's running an Airbnb here, okay? I've got a problem with that. That guy needs to have somebody local. But somebody who lives in Wentzville and it might take them a little bit longer to get here, we're not trying to put that on people. Now, the one other thing the two other things you said I wanted to address, as far as there being a limit on how many days a year. These are dedicated, for the most part, people not renting out their own house for a week here and there. They're taking a house and saying, this house is an Airbnb. The one next door to the post office, as I understand it, is a full-time Airbnb. And there's probably a dozen others around the city. Now, you know, you don't wanna restrict the number of days for the simple reason that you'd rather not have an empty house sitting there. So if somebody's got a house and they don't live there and it's an Airbnb and we say you can only rent it 100 days a year, that means 265 days a year, you've got a vacant house, which I think is worse. And the only other thing I wanted, you had said, well, what if Mike Palmer decides to turn all his houses into Airbnbs? Will not happen for a simple reason. There's not that many people trying to stay in an Airbnb in Ferguson.
Right.
If that was the case, I mean, this would be a high roll in town with that kind of money coming in here, because you said $4,500 for 4 days. They're not charging that in Ferguson, but it is expensive. It still might be $100 a day or whatever. It's a lot more than the month-to-month rentals of a regular rental property. So the fact is, you know, you might have a few people from UMPSL come in or whatever. We've got like a dozen of them in Ferguson right now, and we have no regulations at all. If there was that kind of a demand, he could have done that already. But the fact is, there's not that kind of demand for short-term rentals here, and you know, I don't think there ever will be. So I'm not really concerned about that. I hope I addressed all the questions. I tried to write them down.
Okay, Councilwoman Lipka.
So just want to address a few things. Ms. Kleins, thank you for those questions. And I don't know if anybody's paid attention, but in the past, the first 2 terms that I was on, this was something that I wanted to address a long time ago. Tried to do this with Elliot when he was here. It turned out that it's a very big spider web. There's a lot of questions. One question leads to 4 more questions. So, this isn't gonna be overnight by any sense of the word. But a couple of things that you touched on that I want to go back. First of all, I would like to ask the room to not point out one particular person. You know, when you said, well, what if Mike Palmer did? Let's just keep this conversation on the up and up and not make a dig where we can. The other thing I would also say is, if you limit your question about the 365 days a year, I would say if somebody wants to rent 365 days a year, now they need to be considered a hotel. If they want to be a homey place to stay for a short amount of time instead of a hotel, then that's a short-term rental. That's what Vrbo is, that's what Airbnb is. And we also need to refer to everything we talk about as STR, short-term rental, because the other 2 are branded names. So I would say, in my opinion, that if somebody wants a permit to be able to lease for 365 days a year, that they would now go into the category of a hotel, a residential hotel. I'm just throwing it out there. This is why we're having discussion. I would also say you're concerned about the limit that because of the sense of community, because I wrote down in shorthand, I would think that would come into zoning. So some areas we would zone not to allow any short-term rentals at all. Some neighborhoods, and I think personally, I would like to see most of the neighborhoods be no. I would prefer to see short-term rental to be allowed along the business district, the D2, the D1, the D3 areas and corridors that are behind those business districts, because when people are coming into Ferguson, they're typically coming here if they want to stay in a house versus a hotel. We don't have hotels. So if they want to come into Ferguson and they want to stay here for something at UMPSL or something at Emerson or something at Urban League or something along those lines, then they would look for something to rent along the downtown districts. That would be my suggestion. Let's see. Should they be taxed at a higher rate? I would say yes. Neighbors are able to call City Hall and find out. So that one brought a interesting dilemma to me because I have rented from Verbo many times. I won't rent from Airbnb anymore because they're terrible, but, in my opinion, when, you're right, every time I've rented from them, I don't get the actual address till I've paid my deposit. Now, if I am calling City Hall and they say, yeah, Mrs. Klein's has an Airbnb. Well, now I go on Facebook and say, hey, you know, Miss Klein's has an Airbnb in our neighborhood. It's right here. It's at this address. So my question is, where do we keep that safety going? So as I said, as we do this, one question leads to another question. So I get what you're saying, but that would be the next step of the thought process that I would challenge. You know, how do we, as a neighbor, I want to know if there's one in my neighborhood. But at the same time, am I allowed to know the address? Is that confidential? I don't know. But if I called City Hall and said,
Excuse me, I'm not sure whose phone, if you can put it on vibrate for me, appreciate it.
so those are just, I can't answer all of them, but those are the ones I pinpointed that I wanted to respond to personally. And then the other thing I would love in this discussion, and Mayor, you tell me if I'm wrong, but I would love to get Rachel's opinion on these things. Like, as these people come up, what are the things that come to mind that you want to throw out there?
Well, that was the next thing, refer
Oh.
to the city manager, and then he would get Rachel. John?
Yes, ma'am, I'm back. Mayor and Council,
There's a question for Rachel, and
Yes, ma'am.
then Mike Palmer has a question.
yeah, and before, I have one other comment that we've been looking at some other short-term rentals, places that are doing it, and they're actually doing a hearing before it can become a short-term rental. And then they limit how many rentals that they can have in the short term before they have to go up to a different license. But that's something we could look at. But I'll turn it over to Rachel at this point.
Referred it to you, Rachel.
Oh, okay. So the couple of things that I wrote down is that for taxing a short-term rental, we do currently have a hotel, motel, and boarding house tax that is included in the cost of the business license. And something else that I always like to keep in mind is both the use classifications from the International Zoning Code and then also the SIC industry descriptors. So we need to find something that matches what we want in our zoning code and something that matches the existing definitions in our industry as well.
Is there
Okay.
any example of that?
Mike Palmer,
I also want to provide some
for
context.
you, Michael.
I wanted to provide some context as to where this bill came about. Due to some issues with like short-term rentals within more tourist areas such as the city, there's been newsworthy stories about issues of overcrowding and parties. We haven't really had these issues in Ferguson, and as was previously alluded to, there's really only a dozen or two of these in town. But we wanted to kind of get ahead of this. So in its current state, right now, nothing stops anybody from making their home a short-term rental and having no renter's license and no inspections. So this actually creates a process for registration that would be on OpenGov, similar to a renter's license, but it would be for a short-term property. So it would be publicly available to know. One nice thing about Airbnbs is that they do kind of self-govern. When you rent an Airbnb, you can rate the property itself as a renter, and the renter can rate, it flip-flops both ways. So people that run these properties have a reason to make their property nice, because otherwise no one's gonna rent them. If they show up and the property is filthy or disgusting or not furnished. I never had one of these until I had a family, and we've used these, and they're actually really nice when you travel with small kids, because a lot of them already have a pack and play, kids' toys. So if you're traveling, especially by air, you don't gotta take all that stuff with you. There's a kitchen with utensils, you can make food. You can have privacy if you're gonna be doing anything you need to do with your family. So they're actually kind of nice. And we've had family come visit us personally here, and they've rented an Airbnb in town. And it was really nice because they weren't in our house, but they were close. So this bill aims to actually restrict these and regulate these, where right now it's essentially open season. So right now, to answer your question, Ms. Kleins, nothing stops me from making all my properties an Airbnb, other than the fact that I don't want 100 Airbnbs, and I never will. I could do it right now and I would have no occupancy permits and no inspections. It's currently not regulated. There's no regulations on the book for short-term rentals right now.
Please do not speak out. Let it get finished. Okay.
And that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to regulate them with this piece of legislation. So to answer some of your questions, taxing, it would be very hard to implement. I'm not sure how you would even know how many days a place was rented without getting proprietary information from Airbnb, which they probably won't share. I'm not sure how you would get that information without somebody just giving it to you. And I don't know if they'd be very forthcoming with it. And then you have to have staff to manage it. And all of that for 12 properties, I just don't know. You know, staff could provide some insight if they've had a lot of issues with short-term rentals or not. But if it hasn't been a widespread issue, I don't know if we need a 17-page bill like the city of St. Louis has, which has hundreds of short-term rentals, mostly in mixed-use properties. So I mean, have you had a lot of, Ms. St. Pierre, like a lot of complaints about these, or just complaints about them existing, or?
No, we don't receive any property maintenance complaints. We do have we have 21 Airbnbs in town right now, and a few of them are already licensed. So that means they are following the inspection protocol and the licensing standards. I didn't pull any numbers from your department, but I don't know if you had any specific addresses in mind.
I don't have any addresses in mind. I didn't bring any data with me. However, we haven't had any big issues with short-term or Airbnbs. However, I do recall about a month ago, we did respond to, I can't remember the street, we did respond to a large party on the street inside of a residence where we responded, was able to disperse the occupants, but we haven't had much issues in that regard.
Was that a residence party or was that a rented party?
It was a rented party. Someone rented the house.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
I have one more thing.
One more thing.
Yeah. And furthermore, I wanted to state too, that when a person moves to town with our traditional occupancy permit process and becomes a full-time resident, it's very hard to remove somebody who's a problem person living in our town. When you have a short-term rental, you better be glad that person's gone after 2 days. I mean, I hate to say it, but is it really an issue where we have a problem where, you know, a neighbor, they're going to be glad to have that short-term rental as opposed to a problem tenant who doesn't cut their grass, who doesn't bring their trash cans in. Instead, you have one person 1 day out of the year that has a party or something. That'd be better than having a long-term pain in the butt. I mean, from my personal perspective.
Okay, Mr. Cassoff.
And I want to add, this bill actually has some safeguards from there being big parties, because that's the concern. Some of these Airbnbs down in the city, some young folks will rent it and they'll invite 75 people over and they're drinking and disturbing the whole area. And sometimes there's violence come out of that. So there's two things in this bill aimed at curbing that. First of all, you have to be 21 years old. So you're not going to be an 18-year-old high school senior and have a keg party with a bunch of your high school friends that are underage, because you got to be 21 to rent it. And the second thing is it restricts the number of guests you can have. So I've got a next door neighbor. If they have a birthday party for their kid once a year and have 40 people over, I'm not upset about that. But if I've got a place next door to me that turns out to be the party house and it gets a reputation and they're having big parties every weekend with different people renting it, that's a problem. So the bill states two things. One, you can only have as guests double the number of the occupancy. So in other words, if it's a house that's got an occupancy of 6 people, you can only have 12 people at the house. You can't have a party for 50 people there. And second of all, they have to either park in the driveway or in the street in front of that house. They can't be parking all up and down the street blocking people's driveways and stuff. So really, we're trying to look ahead of the problems that they've had in some other locations and put some reasonable restrictions so that if somebody comes here as a traveling nurse or they're coming to UMSL for a week to do research or something, they can enjoy a stay in our community without incurring the problems that we've seen elsewhere in the metropolitan area.
Okay, thank you. Clerk Pittman, could you call the second person, please?
Adrian Shropshire.
Good evening, council.
Good
Good evening,
evening.
citizens. I'm here this evening to just add to what you've created into an ordinance, into the bill. The city of St. Louis, the housing representative has to be an hour away from his property. And you're right, they have about 11 pages. I have it right here. They have about 11 pages of regulations. But I did look at Kansas City. They define a short-term rental as less than 30 days. The state of Missouri requires a license. Occupancies. No more than 5 unrelated people in one unit. This was on, I looked it up as far as on the site today, Kansas City.
Kansas City.
Yes, Kansas City. Excluding relatives by blood or marriage or adoptions. Usage restrictions. Receptions, parties, weddings, and similar activities. And they brought that in January 13th, 2025. Kansas City. Liability insurance for Airbnbs and short-term rentals. Liability, $300,000 to $500,000. That's just the liability that the owner should be taken out. Then they have it for $1 million in other unrelated things that might happen. For the person, the landlords, or the real estate companies that might come in and want to do an Airbnb or a short-term rental. Parking. There should be a sign mounted on any Airbnb building 1 foot square. There should be, if there's no parking on the street, there should be a limit of 3 parking spaces. If there's no, that just specifies if there's no parking on the street, off-street parking. This one has really shocked me. A neighborhood notice application.
A neighbor what?
A neighborhood notice application where the rental person or the leasee, if you're going to set an Airbnb up or a short-term rental in a neighborhood, you go to the neighbors that might be affected in the front, the rear, the side of any short-term rental, and at least 55% for this to go into the neighborhood in Kansas City, you have to have at least 55% of neighborhood support.
Mrs. Shropshire, you had any questions?
My question is, will we be able to regulate? I've heard everybody say that it's not a big thing, but once we start advertising and once someone comes in, how would we regulate the parties? I know we have it in our ordinances, but I think we need to regulate the parties and the trash. That's another big thing that I read. It's a big thing. I think the police should be involved into it and the public works. One like a family, like a team. So my question would be, how would you regulate the destruction of the neighborhoods and the regulation of the trash that you might get? I'm not saying it's gonna happen. How would we regulate that? So that's it for what I had to say, but the neighborhood notice is very important, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Shropshire. Councilman Cassoff, then Councilwoman Lipka.
I mean, that Kansas City bill is basically would just outlaw Airbnbs here. Being realistic about it. I don't think that that's the right way to go, but I'll also add that this bill places a lot of restrictions that don't exist now. Because understand, right now, there's no regulation at all. That you can have 50 people over to a party right now at an Airbnb, and maybe the police will come, but there's no law against it. This bill says if you rent a house with a 5-person occupancy, you can't have more than 10 people there. So you can have the 5 people that are staying there for the weekend, and they can have 5 guests. So big parties are no longer permitted. We haven't had a problem with that yet. It may be coming, so we're trying to get ahead of that. I'm trying to balance the interests of people that own houses that want to use them for this purpose, while at the same time protecting the neighborhood from people that want to abuse it. And the final thing that makes this kind of a safety valve is that if a house is a nuisance, if they get in a lot of police calls, if there's trash all over the yard and Public Works is writing them up for code violations, the city manager has the authority under this ordinance to suspend or revoke the Airbnb, their short-term rental license. Right, and again, right now, we don't have anything. People can do whatever they want, so this is an improvement. It may not be as tight as they do in some places, but I think it gets us to the point where we can feel safe that our neighborhoods aren't going to be destroyed by people that are irresponsible operators. Councilwoman Lipka, then Councilman Palmer.
So just a couple of things. So, Kansas City defines it as less than 30 days, and I get that, because you gotta have some parameters and a definition. But then I throw again, like I said earlier, and I'm gonna keep doing this, I'm gonna throw at you, let's say, I'm gonna keep using you, Ms. Kleins. Let's say Mildred has an Airbnb, or I just did it myself, a short-term rental. And she has family in Atlanta, and they just had a terrible tornado come through there. And her family lost their house completely down to the ground, nothing's left. And she says, don't you worry, I will give you a place to stay. You can stay at my Airbnb as long as you need. Where do we start coming in then? I mean, if I own a property and I want to let my family or a good friend of mine stay there because they're in a bad strait, I'm the one losing income, not you. So when do we have interference from the community or the city government? Or do I then go to the city and say, hey, I'm going to do this, so whatever fines you're going to charge me out because I'm going to pay them? I mean, I don't know, but those are the questions I would put to you. Also, I would also say that where it says excluding relatives, no more than 5 unrelated people in one unit, excluding relatives, marriage, adoptions, family. I don't know about you, but my family alone is way too many people. So you don't even have to add the other 5. I don't want to be in a room with 30 of them. And then it says exceptions of weddings and parties and so forth. I would disagree there too, because as a wedding DJ for 32 years, some of the most amazing, beautiful weddings were at a Airbnb that we rented for the day, or my clients rented for the day, that overlooked the ocean or overlooked the bluffs of Missouri or something like that. I wouldn't say take that away. And then they had the restrictions. Usually the bride and groom and the parents stayed that night and everybody else left. So, I mean, keep that in mind. And then as far as liability insurance goes, liability insurance is extremely easy to get. I always carried $1 million coverage with my DJ company, always, and it cost me nothing. As far as parking goes, I think that parking is gonna have to be determined on where we zone Airbnb, short-term rentals allowing to be. I know every time I've rented a short-term rental, it was parking for two, period. There was nothing more than that, and you were not allowed to park on the street. And then the final thing that I would point out is that, and Councilman Palmer brought it up too, these companies that will advertise for you have very strict regulations, because what you do reflects on them. And every single one I've rented, both companies that are pretty well known, had very strict rules when you walked in. The owner had it on the refrigerator. You can do this. It was kind of, have you guys seen that Progressive commercial where the Alabama football coach sitting there with the people and he's like, no fun in the hot tub. Don't do this. Don't do that. That's what these lists do. One of the top things every single place I've ever rented in every single state I rented in is trash. If you don't get that trash out, if you don't put that trash can on the curb the day that their service is going to pick it up, they will fine you and fine you and fine you. The fine is no less than $100. And believe me, they don't miss it. So keep in mind that we can question these things, and you absolutely have every right to question, and it's a good question. But we also have to keep in mind that anything that happens in a short-term rental process through these companies is those owners are gonna do stuff like that as well. Am I incorrect, Rachel?
Repeat your question.
I mean, have you found that to be the case in the things that we've seen here in Ferguson? Or have you seen it close enough to know?
Here in Ferguson, no,
Okay, you haven't seen it, or you haven't seen it close enough to know.
I haven't seen it close enough.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Palmer?
Yeah, so one distinction I want to make about some of the comparisons to Kansas City and St. Louis is those are large metropolitan areas that have tourism. So downtown St. Louis might have an influx of 10,000 drunk people who are young on Mardi Gras that go into short-term rentals. We don't have that in Ferguson. From my experience, a lot of people that do short-term rentals in Ferguson are working and they don't want to be in the metropolitan area. They want to be just outside the metropolitan area because they're traveling somewhere for work, whether it be, you know, Monsanto or Emerson or Boeing. You don't get a lot of the, you know, the trash issue, you know, plus we have a solid waste ordinance already on the books. And when you rent it, a short-term rental, you pay a cleaning fee. So somebody comes in and professionally cleans the property and takes the trash every time you leave. So I don't think trash is necessarily an issue. Insurance, the carrier, Verbo, Airbnb, you know, all these organizations, they require that an operator carry insurance on the properties. It protects that company, so they're not named as an additional defendant in case if something were to happen. So, like I said, anytime you read the panic and the fear stories of what's been happening, every time I've read a story, it's always been some sort of loft downtown that somebody rented and they had a big party, they were charging $30 to get in, and then holy hell broke loose. I just don't see that happening in a 1,200 square foot ranch in Ferguson with a 2-car garage. And that's why I think it's important that we regulate them. I don't know if we need to go to the point where we're deciding parking spaces. I mean, we also have parking ordinances, you know, as well. You know, it's one of those things where if you have a problem, the police are going to show up and people are generally going to leave on their own. Wouldn't you agree, Chief Doyle?
Yeah. Well,
Turn
most
your
of the
mic
time.
up.
I mean, generally, when you guys show up, whether or not there's wrongdoing or not, half the people just leave. So.
When I was a kid, I started running.
Oh, okay. All right, would you call person number 3, please?
John and Camilla, right here. Good evening.
Good evening.
To the council.
Ma'am, I'm going to excuse myself for just a quick minute, so I'm not disrespecting you, but I will be right back and she's gonna take good notes for me.
Okay, okay, I got a question.
Okay,
If you have houses like you have, and you decide you wanted to have Airbnb, you do have Airbnb, right? Or you don't? Okay. Now I have a question. Okay, if you have an Airbnb and an adult rent it, and it's for teenagers, who will be fined? Will the person that rented it for the teenagers, would they be fined?
Whoever signs that contract is responsible.
Okay. And if they rent it for teenagers, okay, say if it's next door to you or me or whoever,
Mhm.
and they get rowdy. Okay, so we don't call the council, we call the police, right?
911.
Okay, that was my
Absolutely.
question. Okay.
Don't
And,
ever call the council.
yeah, because I thought I heard somebody say earlier, we call the council.
No,
No,
Yeah.
no.
911. That's the guy who's coming right over there.
Okay, okay. Okay, well, you said something earlier about they don't have to be regulated,
Right?
Now there's no regulations,
but why not?
there's no law against them.
Because the council never did it. That's why we're trying to fix that right now.
Okay,
The
so
reason
you,
you see like Kansas City just passed a bill, St. Louis City passed a bill last year, that all these municipalities and cities are starting to adopt regulations relative to short-term rentals,
okay, so when is Ferguson gonna start?
starting right now.
Okay,
That's why we're here tonight, to go over this bill, hear from all the residents, and if the bills need to be tweaked, it will be tweaked. But that's the purpose of the meeting tonight.
okay, the purpose is for us for you all to
Yes.
regulate it. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, and I got, dang, I have to write it down. Okay, but anyway, that was my, main concern, and the occupancy permit has already been taken care of, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so okay, good. Okay, well, that was,
Well, thank you, Ms. Sevilla.
that was
Thank you.
that was my question. I just wanted to know.
The next person, city clerk.
Well, I was told just to sign in. This is new for me for the first time being here. And, so I really don't have anything to say. I'm just sitting back listening.
Well, that's
And I
good.
feel to have something to say later on probably, but I'm just trying to figure out what's going on in the city and what we're expected. Now, my being a homeowner, I'm expected to keep my home in top shape. That's why I take everything in for me.
That is true.
Whether it be rental or whatever.
That is true. Thank you. Next person, Ms. Clerk. Okay, great. Well, welcome to all the new people. We appreciate you coming out. Next person, Ms. Clerk.
Worried about the circle thing, I'm worried about the code enforcements, that's just my concern.
I can't hear
The
you.
code enforcement,
Code, okay, what question do you have?
well, you know, I've had lots of problems,
Yeah, no.
but it's like, I think after so many calls on certain things, like especially to the police department, people should, Section 8 is my problem, it's been for years. It seems like they don't apply to the rules, people that come in Section 8. You know, I have to apply to rules, I'm a homeowner, I have to do certain things. But some of these people come in and they just do whatever they want to do and get away with it. Nothing's done. I've gone to code enforcement how many times, talked to people, you know, and nothing gets done.
I know we've talked several times and I understand your situation. If you do me a great favor, is leave your name and address with your city clerk, and the city manager and the police chief will get with you. Okay?
Well, we've done that quite a few times, Mayor.
I know we
And-
have.
And they know that her address by heart by now.
Yeah, I know,
Yeah.
but please.
Okay. But that's just my concern. I just feel like I get nowhere, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So,
Okay, Karen.
okay.
Thank
thanks.
you.
Okay.
Mayor, I would also bring up too, kind of what Karen's saying is, you know, we're talking about the regulations of short-term rentals. But we also need to question who's going to enforce these things, because right now we have regulations on Section 8 and we're not enforcing. And she's a prime example of that.
The federal law forbids you to try to regulate Section 8. The only thing they could basically do if a house is rented adjacent to you and there are some violations, you have to call code. You can't signal people out.
Well, what I mean by regulations is not so much that we have regulations as a city on Section 8, but we have the responsibility to get the people who run Section 8 to maintain those properties.
Landlords,
Just like
yes.
every other landlord.
Yeah,
Right, but the city needs to work at it too.
okay. Oh, Councilman Palmer and then Councilwoman, Noah.
This is somewhat off topic, but important, about Section 8 and code enforcement, but I do want to provide some information too, though. You know, there's been a lot of debate about inspections and occupancy and so forth the last couple of weeks. If you were to look at every property in Ferguson residential, occupied, vacant, rental, owner occupied, the most inspected properties are Section 8 properties. You might not believe me, but they are. They get inspected every year, inside and out, by the housing authority, no matter what. If a person moves to Ferguson and buys a home, owner occupant, the inside of that home is not inspected, the outside only. If a person moves to town to rent in Ferguson, the inside and outside are inspected, but not every year, only when they move in. So if they live there for 40 years, that property's inspected one time when they first move in. There's houses in Ferguson that people have lived there so long, they've never been inspected inside because they've lived there since before inspections were a thing here. So, like I said, I agree, there's issues. It's not just Section 8, it's just derelict property. But Section 8 properties, they're the most inspected citywide. You know, it happens every year, no matter what, ifs, ands, or buts, because that voucher is not renewed if that property doesn't pass inspection and a new lease is not signed.
Mr. Palmer,
Thank
I
you.
totally agree with what you're saying, but
It's Councilwoman Noah's turn.
Sorry.
Councilwoman Noah.
Thank you, Mayor. I think Karen's concern is more so with the nuisance. And I mean, it is a concern because does the city have the staff? Will the city be able to enforce if these short-term rentals become a nuisance? Because if I've talked to Karen, I think everyone on this council has, and if she's having these continuous issues, and it's not about, with me, it's not about Section 8, it's about a nuisance property, whether you're a homeowner, Section 8, short-term rental, whomever. How are we going to enforce the ordinance? Yes, we do need an ordinance. I agree to that. But how are we going to really enforce? Because the goal is to raise the value of our neighborhoods, not to bring them down. And no, I do not want to see more vacant properties. It is better to have people, responsible people renting these properties, I agree. But if we can't enforce now and make the situation better, how are we going to do that with short-term rentals? You know, that's another question. That's a huge concern, more than just calling our police, you know, and they come out and, you know, it's quiet for 5 minutes and then, you know, a week later, it's the same issue and it's over and it's over with different people renting these properties. So Karen, it's heard. I hear you, you know, and so it's a concern. Do we have the staff? Are we going to be able to enforce
Yeah.
when we need to enforce?
Did you want me to
Okay.
answer that?
We're
Mayor?
gonna go to the city manager and then we come back to you, Councilwoman.
Yes.
City manager.
Mayor and council, at this point, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn it over to Troy and Rachel. Because we do have some things that we can go after with the landlord agreement and all that. So Troy, if you can talk a little bit about the nuisance, especially with violence, and what our steps can happen. And then Rachel, if you can expand on some of that.
Well, it's pretty simple on from a law enforcement perspective. I mean, obviously, if there's criminal activity at a particular establishment or residence, I mean, we can take action on it. As it relates to it being a nuisance property, I mean, obviously, it'd be more of a code enforcement deal. I mean, something that we probably or maybe should look at in the future is adding some type of added enforcement, or not enforcement, but a penalty on the landlord or something. I know when I worked for the county police department. We had, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Glasgow Village, community up there. That turned into like 70% rental property up there. And, the biggest issue that we had up there was that most of the landlords lived remotely. They were like in Arizona, Florida, so it was difficult to get a hold of the, landlords. They wouldn't, come to court. It wouldn't do anything like that. So it is tough. That's why I'm a, supporter of the landlord being somewhere, relatively close. I agree with you, Council, and Cassoff, that they should be somewhere where they can respond definitely within an hour, hour and a half or something like that. But, when we get these landlords that's, out of state, sometimes they don't care. They rent it out and it's over.
Right.
Rachel?
As far as enforcement goes, it's humanely difficult to enforce with Section 8, just because a lot of times they are underprivileged and elderly, and we don't necessarily have the resources to share with them to help get their properties into a state of compliance. So we usually try to negotiate with them to give them longer timeframes, recommend resources. There's a lot of churches, there's a lot of volunteer groups in the area, and we always try to provide that information for them. I 100% agree that it is wicked hard to keep landlords accountable. A lot of this year, community development took over the rental licenses, and we have 592 licenses so far. And we've accounted for over 2,000 individual addresses. And of those licenses, there are 255 that are out of state. And those out of state ones are pretty difficult to pin down who is the responsible party. Something that I was talking about internally today, not with Chief, was discovering a way to have a responsible person both nearby and who can be held accountable. Because when you have an LLC that's the owner of a property, they have a registered agent. That registered agent is a registered agent. That registered agent is a registered agent, and it's a continuous nonstop train. And so we never really can get a hold of who is responsible. We do have at least 91 rental licenses that not only do they have rentals in the city of Ferguson, but they also live here. So this is a source of income for them and for us. And it's important to us to have some means of identifying a responsible person, and that's the only way that we can really help to encourage the citizens to take care of their properties.
Yeah, Rachel.
Councilwoman Lipka, didn't Councilwoman Robinette?
I think I heard Chief
Yeah.
Hampton. Were you gonna say something, Chief?
Yes, I was. I know one of the issues that we are also having is, I know we're supposed to have people that are supposed to be taking care of the property within, I think it's 30 miles. The problem with that is what we're running into is that they keep switching the who's in charge of doing the maintenance, who's in charge of doing the upkeep of the property or the emergency contact. And that's one of the issues that we're running into that Rachel has really discovered one of our bigger problems.
Okay.
So I guess the thing is, Mayor, I just wanted to respond to one thing, and then I want to get this conversation back on track to short-term rentals. But Councilman Palmer, everything you just said about Section 8, I know you know that to be true, and I'm not saying it isn't, but what I will say that I know to be true is that the 9 years that I've been on city council, I have been going over to Karen's house, I have seen the situation, and if there is a Section 8 inspector that's inspecting her neighbor's house every year, they are not doing their job, because there is grass growing in there was grass growing in the gutters for many years. There was a tree limb hanging off. There were gutters hanging off. There were all kinds of, I mean, the list goes on, and it's a very well documented list because Karen is notorious for meticulous maintenance of her records. So, And I would also say to Chief Doyle, I mean, I personally introduced Karen to Chief Doyle when he first got here. And we sat, the three of us, and went through everything that Karen had, and he could tell that she was a very, well-spoken in regards to what she was talking about. And yet, the situation there is when the police come, then they take off. And then as soon as you leave, they come back, and it's on camera. My question, I guess, then goes to Rachel. And please, I don't own a Section 8. I know about this much about it. But I've had people, like I had a house for a while, and they were reaching out to me saying, can we turn your house into a Section 8 house? So I would still own the house, but then the Section 8 organization would do the renting and collecting and so forth, and then I would get paid. So the question that I come to is, do we have any idea of who those owners are of the Section 8 homes? Are we going, as a city, if we wanted to find somebody or have some communication because of problems, do we go to Section 8 or do we go to the owner? Yeah, and then let me finish, please. I'm not as smart as all of you, but let me finish. And then the question I would have to, now you got me off track, the nuisances. For instance, when we have a lot of nuisances at a bar, we can deny them their licensing. Why are we not doing that in situations like what we're talking about with Ms. Stinger? And, you know, if we have a home that has 62 calls a year, isn't that a problem? I mean, why are we not taking it from that perspective? And now we got to get back on the other topic, and I got to off, sorry.
Did you want me to answer your questions? For contacting the owner, so of a Section 8 house, so we are not, we are not contacting Section 8 unless it's just as a resource, like we need help finding somebody's information. So ultimately, the owner is always responsible for their property, whether or not the lease agreement says that they need to take care of, the tenant needs to take care of the gutters or not. What was the second half of your question? I already forgot it.
I did too.
It went out of my head. But for nuisances, yes. For nuisance related repeat offenders, we do already have for rental licenses, it's in our code already that if they do have, you know, violations present or nuisance violations, as in just like consecutive violations, that we can withhold their rental license. This year, we have had plenty that have come through that have had open violations, and we stop them and say, hey, you need to fix this before we're going to issue your license. And I do think that it would be valuable to have more limitations in place to revoke these sort of licenses or permits that we have, and help to keep those property owners accountable for their stuff.
Councilwoman Robinette,
I'm good.
you good?
Yeah, I think we'll move.
Okay,
I just,
1 minute. Oh, okay. All right.
well, I just want to say, Section 8 is a payment method. And we're going down a dangerous road here, okay? I have a small number of rental properties in Ferguson. I've had a lot of really good tenants. I've had a small number of terrible ones. The terrible ones were not Section 8. I'll bet the next door neighbors thought they were, but you don't know who a Section 8 is. And I don't know if Karen's next door neighbor, that may not even be a Section 8. If you haven't seen the voucher or the contract with the housing authority, you don't know if that's Section 8 or not. So, look, we have to deal with the behavior of the tenants and the failure of the landlord to maintain the property. It's none of my business or anybody else's who's paying the rent on that house. So I don't want us to get down on poor people and start talking about Section 8,
No, we can't do that anyway. Go ahead.
but people do it all.
I know.
I wanted to say too that I only have 2 Section 8 tenants, and I bought the property with them in it. And like someone said, they're 2 elderly women, single. They've been there forever. But I don't market my properties as Section 8 or they call housing choice voucher eligible. But they do have, like I said, I got a call once on my routine inspection. I had to fix the oven burner. And then they actually called me a month later and said, hey, we need to do another follow-up inspection. I said, well, I passed. And they said, no, it's quality control, which is kind of cool. But they actually had another inspector who came in to check the other inspector to make sure that they were doing their job right, which is, they said, we're not going to fail you on anything. It's the way to make sure that our employees aren't just sitting in the truck and not doing nothing. So I'm not saying that residents might have issues with, the quality of their inspections. But the beauty of, if you do indeed know your tenant or neighbor is Section 8 and there's a problem, every person who receives a voucher has a caseworker. And they're very responsive. They work at the housing authority, either the city or the county. County's on Natural Bridge, city's downtown, and they have emails, phone numbers, and they're a caseworker, and they're to help that person with resources as far as their voucher, but other things as well. So that'd be a good person to reach out to, because like Mr. Kassoff said, sometimes people just say it's Section 8, but they might not actually know if it actually is. And that's not necessarily a problem if things are being done properly. Back to what Ms. St. Pierre said, though, you said we have roughly 500 rental licenses. Is that correct?
592.
592. And 2,000 doors roughly, correct?
2,217.
And how many of those are mixed multifamily property units and apartments?
We don't have that many.
1,400?
More than 592, that's for damn sure.
And we have like 1,500 apartments, right?
Say that again.
We have like 1,500 apartments in our city, right?
Yes.
And I would assume that those 8 people all have licenses, right?
So our biggest units,
Park North.
let's see.
Canfield.
Yeah, a little over 1,500.
So roughly, we're talking 700 single family homes, give or take. And we have roughly, would you say 24 short-term rentals you saw?
21.
21.
Airbnbs, yeah.
So in the grand scheme of things, all rental property that's registered, we have 1% short-term rentals. So you want to be cautious when you're drafting legislation that you're not making it overburdensome for 1%, which staff has already said haven't really been a problem as of yet. So, you don't want to flat out outlaw things, but you don't want to also just make it where it's basically essentially illegal when we haven't had issues. And the hope was that this legislation will be a starting point that if we did have issues down the road, it can be changed. Because like I said, right now, it's open season.
Right. Thank you, Councilman Palmer. Councilman Williams?
All right, as far as the short-term rental, I don't think it's an issue.
We
So,
can't hear you.
all right, can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better.
All right, as far as the short-term rentals, I don't think it's an issue. So my thing, if it's not broken, don't fix it. But I understand we're trying to get ahead of it, but I think we should come to that point when it's an issue. Now, as far as the Section 8, I'm just going to be real. Section 8 is trouble. I'm just going to keep it real. And I'm going back historically to how Section 8 got started. So the CIA and other government operatives, they did an experiment. They had rats in a confined area, and they gave them just enough food and water to eat. And the rats started killing each other. And they said, I got a good idea. So they put Black and brown people in projects, which was an experiment, and they started killing each other. And and these projects were in downtowns and major cities. When that violence and that crime started pushing over into white areas, it was an issue. So all major cities, just not St. Louis, all over the country, they tore down these projects or experiments, and they gave Section 8 vouchers. And in St. Louis, a lot of the Section 8 vouchers are in North County. So you have white flight. Like the white residents leave and more brown and Black people come with Section 8 vouchers. Not saying that everybody with Section 8 and, violence and crime, but typically it's social economics. The more education you have, the more income you have. It's just a way of life. St. Louis is even more divisive because of the racial tensions. I mean, this is the most segregated metropolitan in the country. However, Section 8 is a federal law. You cannot discriminate against Section 8, but I'm going to keep it real. Section 8 is not good. It's just not. So I don't know if we can regulate it because you can't discriminate, but 9 times out of 10, that is not good for a region. It brings a lot of crime and violence. And a lot of these Section 8 vouchers, they were in projects. In Atlanta, you can go to an area, it looks lovely because it was a suburb, but you would get carjacked and killed in a minute because it's Section 8 vouchers. That's all I had to say about that. That's what we really need to be talking about. And I feel for the lady, you know, that's bringing her property value down, and she's staying beside a Section 8 house. And like Nick said, we don't know if that's Section 8 or not. We can look at the tax records and see who owns it. We can call the Section 8 people, but they're supposed to be on it. Like, you have to get screened several times. If it doesn't pass, they won't renew the voucher. But that's what we really should be talking about, not the short-term rentals.
Thank you, Councilman Williams. The next person. Thanks for your observation, Ms. Karen. And like I said earlier, leave your name and address with the city clerk, please. Go ahead.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So I'm actually speak in appreciation of this bill. So before I get into that, I would first also like to cite that about 2 council meetings ago, Councilor Lipka suggested that bills be introduced in new business before they become put on the other parts of the agenda. And I would just really like to suggest that's a wonderful idea. And I hope you guys adopt it, because I think we see how many people are here tonight to put their comments in on these bills, and how many were here 2 weeks ago when we had the same kind of a forum. We can iron out a lot of problems, and most importantly, get a lot of good understanding of what the proposers' intentions are. We even had Mr. Palmer did this a couple times when he first took a seat on the dais, and it really helped expedite and develop consensus on the ordinances before they went very far. So most of my comments are going to be pretty specific to different aspects of the bill. So first and foremost is that, listening to some of the comments that have been made tonight, you know, ordinances always regrettably have to be written for the worst case scenarios. So I understand these comments that these things aren't likely to happen here. And I hope they don't, but just to let we, as a preface to some of these other comments, you know that I've done a whole lot of renovation in our house, and many times we have had to find other places to stay because the water is turned off or whatever. There's so many things going on. There are several motels that are in the immediate area that we cannot stay in. There are so many parties going on in motels around us that they refuse to let anyone within a 25-mile radius stay there. So, and we can do, yeah, exactly. So these things do happen. So once again, regrettably, ordinances have to look at what's the worst case scenario. So I'm going to get into a few of my comments here as I look over the bill. Well, the first very question is another preliminary one. There was a short time when the city's comments were being attached to bills as they were put on the agenda. And I would like to encourage that to happen again. If Ms. Saint-Pierre Saint-Morin has comments or opinions on this, and those are quite helpful. And again, the more information we have and understanding what the intent of the bill and the council's views are, the better. And as I talk here, if you would like to interrupt me, I would appreciate it, because I think that kind of a dialogue is very helpful. So my main concern here has to do with, we'll start here with the definition of excessive visitors. Now, you have to read the bill carefully, but there are two different aspects to the bill. There are occupants and there are visitors. The occupants, as defined later on in this ordinance, are the people who are renting the property. And that is limited by the number of occupants is limited by our minimum living space regulations of section 7145. Okay, now those are already quite generous. Basically, we have adopted what I believe are pretty close to what the Federal Housing Authority standards are. So bedroom just needs to be 7 foot by 10 foot, something like that. And you can have one person there. So then, if we look at how this is written, you have occupants and then we have excessive visitors. Excessive visitors is a separate thing and is twice the number of occupants. So that means when we're talking about there won't be any large parties, there's only 12 people. Well, it's 3 times the number that are permitted by the right, not by, yeah, well, let me finish and then I would like your response, right? Because that's why I was saying this needs to be a dialogue because these things are just all kind of interrelated here. The way I read it, it says later on the number of occupants is limited by the minimum living space regulations. And then it says here that excessive visitors, which are separate than occupants, is how I define it. How I see it, is limited to twice the number in that. So when I calculated my own house, we can easily, if we use it a different way, we can easily have parties over 50 people. Right? Because we have that enough space and my house is.
Your occupancy
medium
is
size.
25?
I'm sorry?
Your house has an occupancy of 25 on?
No, it's because it's twice the number of visitors. See, you have
Okay, no,
separated.
okay, the definition of excessive visitors says the presence of, along with those renting the property. So the ones renting the property are included.
Never mind. I did fast. Okay, you're right.
So,
So
yeah,
it would be twice, that would be, so my house would be.
they're
35.
included, but it's not just double the number of rents. Like say 2 people rent a 6-person house, they could have 10 guests then. But it'd be limited, the number of renters plus visitors can't be more than total the maximum load. So a 3-bedroom house in Forestwood, they're 2-person bedrooms, that's a 6-person occupancy. If 2 people rent it, they could have 10 people over. If 6 people are staying there, they can have 6 people over. It's a maximum of 12.
Okay, but remember that it's not how many people are living there, right? Because if you are over 100 square feet.
Then
I
it's a
think
3rd
then
person.
you have 3 people,
Right.
right? So
right.
it's a 10 by 10 room,
But
is not big.
It's double, not triple.
Okay, so we could still have 40 people in some of the larger houses.
If you got a house that's got 20-person occupancy serving as an Airbnb, I don't think anybody, I mean, I'm a landlord, not an Airbnb person, but if you got a house with 20-person occupancy, that's a big, expensive house and
And we have quite a few of them in our
renting that,
city.
right, but renting that out either to as a regular landlord or an Airbnb is such an exposure to damage and expense that I just really don't think it's gonna happen.
But, okay, but also, now that you've clarified, and I appreciate that, when you've clarified that it's along with those renting the property, but it doesn't say twice the number that are renting the property, it's still saying twice the number that are permitted by the space requirement. Right?
It says
So-
the total number of people, including visitors and those renting the property, shall not exceed twice the occupancy load under our space regulations.
So we have houses that could easily have 50.
If somebody turns a 25-person house into an Airbnb, yeah. And I mean, I don't have a problem with capping it at a fixed number as well, but what I'm more concerned about is if somebody rents a 2-bedroom and it has 30 people over.
Well, I just think Okay, all my comments are going to be, I think these are things that need to be considered.
Mhm.
And that we need to consider amending
Yeah.
the bill to take care
No,
of.
I
these
mean,
things.
and we could
If
fix
it's
that
a-
by capping it, saying double, but not more than 20 or 15 or whatever.
That would go a long way to help that,
Okay?
yes.
I square.
It's actually under the definitions in, the very first section, excessive visitors.
Right. We'll have to look at that.
Okay, we got that one. What is your next one?
Okay, well, well, I missed the very first one, which is, that's recognizing that thankfully we rejected the, or have put on hold the ordinance about, getting rid of occupancy permits, because this entire thing relies upon occupancy permits for rental units of less than 6 units. So all these provisions go away once that ordinance is approved.
The ordinance has been taken off.
Yes, I'm just warning,
7303.
because they were supposed to have been done at the same time. So we need to be careful about how we're writing these things. Then the next question I have. Oh, the next thing is that these only need to have one person over the age of 21 to be the renter, which means that everyone else can be under 21.
Mhm.
So we again have a party with 50 people in it. Only one of them has to be 21 years of age, and everyone else can be less than that. Okay. Then the next concern I have is about the supervisor of it. This is from my own personal experience. So,
Alan,
okay,
as a matter of law, I have 2 teenage daughters. How do you distinguish between me traveling with my 2 teenage daughters versus somebody else, legally speaking?
I'm just saying, this is a concern. You're saying that you could have up to, however many people are there visiting, partying, whatever.
But the
and only one has to be
21-year-old at least isn't a high school senior.
Mhm.
What I'm trying to prevent is high school senior having a keg party and inviting all his sophomore and junior underage friends and
I'm presenting these as concerns, right? I don't necessarily have the solution either.
I'm sorry, I'll stop.
And I don't mean to take too much time here, so I will try to be quickly. There's a couple other things that are concerned. So recently, we did do a short-term rental, and we'd have no idea, but we assume that the owners are snowbirds. Right? So they're far away, in Florida or something, and they had a manager, and the manager was nearby and could respond quickly, but had very limited authority to do anything. And there were quite a few problems that developed because of that. And so we need, I think, to put in here what the authority of the manager is. He could basically get us in the door, and that's about it. So if there had been a problem, and then he had no authority to do anything about it.
Councilwoman Robinette.
So 2 things, the point you just made, if there's an issue, I would think that there'd be something with the short-term rental company that would, like, you would have recourse through them. But going back to your point about if somebody who's 21 rents and then you double the occupancy, with underage people, then the neighbors can call the police. I mean, that's the recourse there. If they're having a party, they can call the police and the police can, break up a party.
Right, I understand that, but my understanding is the reason for this ordinance is to try to have an issue in which you have to call the police.
Right, but you can't limit,
I understand.
like Nick saying, like if I traveled with my teenage kids, I wouldn't want I'm a grown person, like I'm allowed to bring teenage kids with me. And if, like, say you have soccer friends there with you too.
Softball team.
Yeah, softball team, whatever. be careful how you limit. We don't, it's not like we have 200 of these. I understand what you're trying to get at, but carving it out to specifically, could be an issue, is
Well,
my point.
I think my first suggestion is that you just do cap the number of people, period, that can be
We heard
partying
that.
there.
Yep.
Right, so rather than have it be based upon the minimum space requirements, which is again, very, very generous, maybe you want to do something that's much more specific. Right, so that you don't have 121-year-old and 60 people that are partying.
Yeah, no, we got, oh, okay.
Okay, the next part, and I'm almost done here, unless you have a lot of comments, but the next part is under the reporting. It does not say where the report goes, where that is made public or whether that's written only. And that goes to some of the next concern that I have that I don't have an answer for at all. To me, it is very, very helpful if all the neighbors are informed that there is a short-term rental going in. There are times when that will be a problem, depending on who your neighbor is and how things work. But from my personal experience, I almost got in. We've only done short-term rentals twice, and each time I could have had trouble with trespassing. The very first time, the GPS took us to the wrong address. And the second time, we took us to the right address, but there's no signage, there's no site lighting, and there's all kinds of vegetation. We could not see the house at all. So I had to go way onto the property before I was able to determine that that is where we were supposed to have been. So I could have very easily gone to the wrong address in each of these cases.
Been there,
So
done that.
okay, so the issue is here, what can we do about it? Because again, I don't think that in every case, the neighbors should be informed. In most cases, I think we have good neighbors that we certainly can rely on them and that it would be helpful to do. But certainly the issues of site lighting, having easily visible house number, et cetera, I think would go a long way to help that.
Okay.
I mean, we have ordinances, or the International Building Code, I believe, has requirements for house numbers of a certain size. And I've had inspections where code enforcement said you don't have appropriate house numbers, so we should continue to enforce that. What I don't want to do, and you're talking about site lighting and other things, I don't want the short-term rental house in the middle of your neighborhood to stand out like a sore thumb either. You know, we don't want to turn this into some institutional looking thing by regularly, you have to have certain lighting and you have to have the bushes at a certain height or whatever. You want it to look like a house, right?
Yeah, I don't mean to imply any of that. I had to use a flashlight to be
Okay.
able to see to get on the property because there was absolutely nothing.
I hope you gave them a
Right.
bad review.
Right, and I could not see the house number, which was there until I was on their porch, which took a bit of effort, because it was
Yeah.
upstairs and around the corner and everything.
Yeah,
So that's all. We just need to make sure that wayfinding is easy and there's we can be careful that there's no trespassing issues.
Thanks,
Okay.
Alan.
Thank you, Alan. At this time, city manager asked to be excused because he is not feeling well and that the assistant city manager would take all questions. In addition to that, we started 15 minutes late. I'm gonna add 15 minutes on the time. That'll be 7:45. So how many people we have left?
For this one?
Yeah, for this one. 4. So
3 minutes.
so hopefully we could get through the first bill. Okay, who's next?
Jamil Frank.
And this has been a great conversation.
Good evening. I'm Jamil Franklin, 427 Church Street. Just wanted to start piggybacking off the conversation about Section 8. If you're having any issues with Section 8 property, you should reach out to the Housing Authority. And like Mike said, you might need to check with the city and the county. I will say the city housing authority, they're a lot more together. And even the city, you guys can get a list of all the Section 8 properties that are located in Ferguson if you desire, just to know what's here. Also, those inspections, in theory, are happening. Mostly they're happening on the project-based side. So like apartment complexes that are Section 8, those get inspected regularly. A lot of the single-family households, it kind of depends on the caseworker that's on that particular area. Some are better than others. As it relates to this ordinance, I think it's definitely needed. But when I look at it, I think about, what's the most efficient way to actually enforce it. And I guess the expectation is for law enforcement to enforce these provisions. And as it is now, we'll be sending them out there, and basically we want them to see, check for occupancy. How many people do I see? That's kind of rough to know how many people are there, whether it's 5, 10, 15, 20. I think what you need to add to the bill is just excessive noise. My mother-in-law, she lives next door to an Airbnb down in Skinker de Bolivar. #1 complaint for the last 4 years, noise. But whether it's 2 people, 3, 10, 15, if they're making too much noise, that triggers, residents to be upset, call the police. Police can do a ride-by, take a look at the scene. They've got cams, they can record and say, okay, yeah, this is kind of unruly, we're gonna shut it down, or, hey, this isn't an issue. And so they're using their ears and their eyes to make the determination whether or not something is excessive as it relates to noise. So I think that might need to go in this bill.
How do you regulate that?
So if we want to get specific, I
enforce
mean,
that?
they have, so there's equipment that the city can purchase to actually.
We have a noise ordinance.
Yeah, there's a noise.
And it's hard to enforce.
So I'll tell you, we go out and do inspections all the time because there's certain noises are exempt, like trash trucks, trains, but we've had to go out and actually test for 2 hours at a time, all the background noise with special equipment. Now, I don't think the city or law enforcement wants to do that, but I guess I would trust them, to know what if it's an unruly party or something.
We have a noise ordinance right now, and we have an owner occupant on North Harvey who is a persistent violator, and the police have been involved. It's been going on for 6 months.
Right.
It's hard to enforce. But look, as far as the numbers go, it's not that the police are gonna come by every day and count how many people are walking in and out of the house. But if the police get a call from the next door neighbor that says there's a crazy party going on at the short-term rental next door, and police pull up and there's 35 people in the backyard, then they're in violation.
Well, yeah, so like you said, Ferguson is not necessarily a vacation destination city.
But it could be a party.
There could be a party, and as you said, your neighbors have parties, I have parties. Nobody's ever called the police on me. Now, if you're unruly and it's late, somebody could potentially call law enforcement. And so if they're loud, but there's only 3 people there, are they in violation of this ordinance?
They're in violation of the noise ordinance, which is a nuisance, which is covered by this as well.
Well, so all I'm saying is add some language in there specific to that for this ordinance.
Well, no, we don't want to
Short term.
duplicate the general nuisance ordinance. The general
let me
nuisance
ask you this,
ordinance
who
still
enforces-
applies at a short-term
Who
rental.
enforces the noise ordinance in Ferguson? Is it code? Is it law enforcement or?
Law enforcement.
The police does it
Yes.
solely, okay. Well, that would be the provision I would recommend for this bill. I wouldn't waste law enforcement's time trying to figure out how many people are. Now, when it's easily accessible, 30 people out front, 40 people on the side of the house, okay, that goes without saying. But 9 times out of 10, they're gonna use their eyes and ears to make that judgment call.
I would also.
1 minute, Councilman Palmer.
I wanted to direct this towards Chief Doyle. In a former life of mine, I was known to have a few parties. And Ferguson police would show up. And we were of age at the time. So actually not in violation of anything other than noise. And usually the way it went down was, next time we come back, we're taking people with us. And after that, it didn't, we stopped. And I would imagine that's probably to this day still how it goes. They checked a couple IDs, everybody of age, they saw any narcotics, which weren't at my parties. Usually it was just beer. They would have handled people, but people knew, the police showed up, the cops are here. The music usually automatically comes down when the police show up, generally. And if the police came back, heads were gonna roll. I mean, it's just the reality. And I imagine, is that how things would go
Yeah,
today?
I mean, let's be honest here. I mean, people gonna have parties where you got a rental property, you own a house, you're gonna have parties, and every now and then, we're gonna get a call where someone says, hey, we got a loud party next door, and oftentimes when we respond, we usually give a warning, we'll say, hey, look, your neighbor's calling, the music up too loud or whatnot, can you calm it down a little bit? Usually we have to respond again, then we usually probably write you a summons for peace disturbance and then kill the party.
Okay, all right, well, that's all I have. Thanks.
Mayor, I did want to address this, though. One of the other things you were talking about, the wording, Mr. Franklin, I mean, quite honestly, the only thing I think that may possibly need to be and I think it's probably in here because Nick usually does, but something that says all current ordinance or all current laws will be followed or effective to this ordinance. As regards to noise, we want to talk about that. So, I've had many large parties too, and I will tell you, if you don't want your neighbors to call on your party, invite your neighbors. That's the first rule. I'm not even kidding. When I do weddings in somebody's backyard and I sit down with my first consultation with the client, I'm like, have you informed your neighborhood that we're gonna do this? Have you invited your neighbors? And then the other thing I do as a responsible business owner is I find out what the noise ordinance is for their community.
Okay.
Because I personally will not go beyond. I will not, if they say they want to book me till 2 o'clock in the morning. No, your noise ordinance ends at 11. Can't do it. I've DJ'd at the Butterfly House many, many times. Let me tell you, 10:59, you were done. Because there is nothing allowed. Ladue, Frontenac, all of them, they'll come find you. So, as far as that goes, I would say, and I agree with everything you guys are saying, but as far as the ordinances go, whether you are a rental, whether you are a short-term rental, whether you're a homeowner, the noise ordinance is going to be in play. And I'm a DJ, believe me, I get called, but I always invite my neighbors so they come and we're all having a good time. But I love my music loud. That's what I do.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Cassoff has a
I
question.
just have one quick question. In terms of keeping people apprised of whether a particular short-term rental is a party house and becoming a problem, would there be any difficulty for the police department to? She's gonna provide an annual report of addresses that are short-term rentals. If she gives you that list well in advance of submitting it to council, can you annotate it with the police calls over the past year to those addresses so that council and the public can know this house is a problem?
Yeah, so I'm certain we can do something like that.
On liquor license.
Okay, I'm gonna amend the reporting requirement to include that. I just wanted to check
Kind of
with
like
you
the
guys
liquor
first.
license rule.
Oh, okay. Next person.
Good evening. I'm
Good evening.
Shirley Emerson, 261 Royce. Thank you all for coming out this evening. As I'm sitting here listening to this, the thing that I guess keeps coming to mind with me, first of all, Airbnbs, we're trying very hard to build a very cohesive community. We're trying to increase the level of home ownership. I'm concerned because Airbnb sometimes exasperate the housing shortage. They add to the local housing shortage. And they also affect affordable housing because it sometimes leads to increases in rent and increases in the value, in the cost of living in a community, which ultimately drives people out. So my question then is, and I heard him say we have 21 right now. So I'm wondering, is there going to be a cap put on it in terms of how many we have that are allowed to come into the community? Also, I'm wondering, would it be an opportunity for the neighborhood, if it's coming into an area, are the residents going to be notified in advance and be able to have some type of public hearing where they can express their support or non-support of this entity coming into their community? These are the kinds of things that I'm concerned about.
So before you got here, I did bring up when, Mildred, Miss Kleins was speaking, she was our first speaker. One of the things that I personally would like to see is that this bill have a little more zoning teeth to it. In the sense that, you know, where you are in Forestwood, I used Forestwood as an example. I would not want to see these in neighborhoods like that. I would not want to see these in my community. Where I would like to see us focus these more along is the business districts. So in the
Definitely.
sense that maybe you have a business district and like you're West Florissant, but you know, you guys are off of West Florissant, but there's no major businesses there. So,
Yeah.
excuse me?
Go ahead.
So I don't know how we would do that, and I don't even know, Rachel, but I know that there are other communities that have zoning very stringently as to zoning for short-term, zoning for long-term, zoning for nothing, you know, no term at all. And they do have they have a number of how many can be allowed in those areas. So I think what you're getting at is very valid. And I think it's a very strong point to consider. And then putting a cap on the allowed, I don't know. So that's where I was at with your comments. I just wanted to let you know that too.
You and Napoleon.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think that, well, first of all, we've already, the short-term rentals we have right now, most of them are not in the business district. They're in your neighborhood already. And they're completely unregulated right now. So we're placing regulations and restrictions on something that right now there's nothing. So, but I have a concern, first of all, about the economic practicality. And second of all, about the legality of saying that if I rent to people a month at a time, it's okay, but if I rent to them a week at a time, it's not. I don't know whether that creates an outright ban is going to create a problem. I think a short-term rental is a residential use, and so I don't know that addressing it in the zoning code is appropriate. I would also say, suppose we do address it in the zoning code. We're gonna end up with no short-term rentals, and some people are fine with that, I understand. Some people are fine with that. I don't own any short-term rentals and I couldn't care less one way or the other, but when we went to Florida and stayed in a short-term rental, it was in an area where some people had their vacation home that they just used personally. Some people lived there all the time and some people had short-term rentals. You know, if we regulate these things to require that landlords be responsible and that if we have unruly tenants, that guy and his crew are gonna show up and deal with it in a prompt manner, what you're gonna have is a house in your neighborhood that's well maintained and the grass is cut, and most of the time ain't nobody there. So, you know, as opposed to right now in Ferguson, we don't have a housing shortage problem in Ferguson. We have a vacancy problem in Ferguson. And, you know, on every street, there's vacant houses practically. So I'm really not concerned. Do we want 10 of them all in a row on one street? We'd rather not, for sure, but if they're well regulated and well run and our police and code enforcement are doing their job, I think you're gonna be happy with your neighbors.
And I hear what you're saying. You're right. We have a vacancy problem. We have a lot of vacant homes. But what we're working to do is to fill those homes with homeowners
That would be wonderful.
versus, you know, short term.
That would be ideal. I agree.
Because short term is just that. They're there and then they're gone. So then we still have these vacant houses sitting in a community.
They're still keeping that up though. The problem with vacant houses that we have is they fall into disrepair, and, you know, then have to be torn down. So if somebody is purchasing a home in order to make it a short-term rental, they're gonna keep that home, you know, so people actually wanna rent it.
It's a
But
product.
the problem with vacant homes too is that they do attract problems. They attract people that want to do things to the home or break into it or whatever. And in these cases, sometimes there's people that, there are periods when there's nobody there, as he just said. So it's a problem. And
Okay,
we'd rather not have it.
Councilwoman Nord
Thank-
and Councilman Palmer can answer your question.
Thank you,
Okay,
Ms. Emerson, for the comment, because I do think that we do need a cap. Can you hear me? Is that better? Hello? It's on. I don't know why you can't hear me. Is that better? Maybe it's not on. Is that
it
better?
is on.
Okay, is that better? I do believe that we need a cap. Because when you talk about, and we do need regulation because it is happening now and there is no regulation. However, when you talk about the rentals, well, the short-term rentals being just in the downtown area, there are neighborhoods in the downtown area. So do we want to overload those neighborhoods in down, which is Ward 3, which is the ward of Ward 3 and some of Ward 2. And so we don't want all the short-term rentals there, and it's not fair not to have them in other subdivisions, because what are we saying to those people who live in the downtown area? Oh, our subdivision is better, so we're not going to have any short-term rentals. We'll just put them in this area. So zoning does play an important part, and I know that that's not happening now, and we do have to have regulation, but we do need caps in where these short-term rentals are going to be placed. You know, it's just not fair to have them in the downtown area, and that's why we need zoning. I mean, where are we at with the zoning? Can the city respond to that? I mean, or are we just going to proceed and there will be no zoning when it comes to the short-term rental locations?
So our zoning code currently, we do have some limitations in place. So this is where like the definitions and use classifications and SIC codes come into play with zoning. And we have we have 4 residentially zoned areas that currently allow B&Bs. And if you refer to our zoning code definitions and then refer back to the SIC table will help you to identify short-term rentals under that definition of a bed and breakfast or of a hotel, motel, hostel type of short-term rental. And in our downtown district, all 5 of our downtown districts are permitting bed and breakfasts with a special use permit. And there's only one downtown district where you have to have a special use permit for the first story only, or the ground level. And then our C1 and C2 districts also allow hotel motels. So again, if we're cross-referencing those definitions, we can bring that back to short-term rentals as well.
okay, Councilman Palmer, and then we go to how many people left? 1 or 2? 2, okay.
2 things. I read an article a few months ago about how the short-term rental industry has actually reached market saturation probably 2 years ago during the height of COVID. There was a lot of extra resources. People were traveling more. But there's actually less short-term rentals now nationally than there were a couple of years ago. So that trend would arguably probably be, you're not going to see too many more unless, obviously population growth or demand. But also, I ran into a new resident in town who bought a home here because they were traveling and they stayed here for a month for work. They got hired here and they stayed here short-term, then they bought a home here. So their 30 days here in that short-term rental with their family made them realize we were a welcoming community where they wanted to put down roots, and that's a good thing. So I just want to say it's not always just parties. It could be a nurse in town working at Barnes, and it often is. I ran into a lady the other day when I was walking. She's rented her basement out for 20 years to medical workers. We don't, and that wouldn't even be we wouldn't even know that it's almost all word of mouth at this point. She has a revolving door of people that come, and she has a separate entrance and they do their thing. And, I said, I'm not saying nothing, but, and it's perfectly legal that she does that. And she said, it's open and transparent. She tells them, hey, we're going to share a kitchen, and they're fine with that. So you know, it's not always bad. There's always positives that can come out of things too. So I just want to make that known too.
Anything else, Miss Emerson?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Who's the next person? Miss Butler? Hi.
Okay, so I'll make it short. Well, I'll just ask a couple clarifying questions mostly, and maybe a few suggestions. So clarifying questions and on C, occupancy permit required on the exterior and interior compliance. Is it a special compliance for short-term rental or is it regular compliance? Just, okay,
Health and safety.
okay. Answer, thank you. Okay, on D, where it says the owner and manager shall appear within 1 hour if requested by law enforcement, fire, or anybody. What if they live within an hour, but they go on vacation? So that means they should not rent the property out if they're gonna be more than an hour away. Just something to think about. You don't need to answer. I mean, I'm just throwing it out there. On E with enforcement, actually, let me go back to limitations D on number C. On that last line where it says, and shall produce those records upon request of any representative of the city. I wonder if maybe you might want to say, upon request of any authorized employee of the city. So that's just a suggestion, an authorized employee versus any representative of the city. And that would clear up what Mildred's concern was. On number E, enforcement. On number A, nuisances. Nuisances shall be enforced by the police department. I'm wondering, nuisance, do you really want to do nuisance? I mean, so I'm just wondering if that should include or be substituted by code enforcement. Is code enforcement the right person?
Code enforcement doesn't enforce nuisances. They enforce.
So what
Code
does,
enforcement deals with buildings and grass, police deal with people.
okay, so the nuisances are always people driven or nuisances can be property driven. So however, I'm just throwing that out there,
Okay,
however you do it.
Well, I mean, so the code enforcement process right now, you get written up by code. If you don't do anything for a long time and it keeps getting worse, it might eventually be declared a nuisance by the city. And I think at that point, the police would step in.
Well,
But up
actually-
to that point, it's just code enforcement.
Actually, when I look at my notes again, my question is, really, is that really necessary? Even saying that, because isn't that what happens anyway? So A might not even be necessary.
It's just saying it's covered by the ordinances already put forth. I mean, like the ordinances that are already there, that's what's covering it.
And there's times too where law enforcement and code enforcement would go together to a property because of some violations. So for example, it could be in which you describe like a nuisance, somebody's not cutting their grass or it's been that way for a while. However, at the same time, that's a known drug house also. So we're code enforcement, law enforcement team together.
Okay, I'm just throwing it out there. It seems like it's covered anyway, and I don't know
That's what
if
it
it needs
states.
to be
It's covered.
in
Okay.
this ordinance.
And I would also just throw in there too, that, you know, and I'm guilty of it tonight too. We have to remember, this is a product for this person. So their home is only gonna make them the most profit if it looks great on the outside and looks great on the inside. So that's something to keep in mind. I mean,
Okay.
I think for myself, and I think of, and I'm hearing it tonight too. All of us are concerned about the things that we've experienced in our community based on what we've seen renters do, which are different than short-term renters.
Yeah.
okay.
So,
Councilman Palmer.
But I can allude to that too, like code enforcement isn't necessarily be a huge issue with these properties because, like I said, it's almost self-regulated. I mean, when I went to Washington DC, I stayed in someone's basement and they lived upstairs. The towels were folded like doves and there was a chocolate on the pillow and the lights were on, there was music playing when I walked in.
and I was in their basement in Georgetown, and I had to park
Okay.
3 blocks away. We forgot our baby carrier, and then she said, oh, I have one, use ours. Like, it's not like you're walking into a house, you're going through the weeds, you can't see the address.
Yeah, I'm
number.
not
You
even
know, it's
making.
Except for that
that
one island went
It's
to.
just- It was just a quick question.
Read the reviews,
But-
Alan.
So I also just wanted, the basis of this whole, the basis, well, 2 points. So let me just even start with my overarching point is, I see this and I see the, this ordinance or this bill, and I see the bill for, occupancy permits and stuff like that. I think we need a whole this is all piecemeal. We need a whole overarching housing policy. And particularly, I am most concerned about all the phone calls I've been getting over the last 5 years, probably 5 a week, about, you want to sell your property? And I think we need a whole overarching policy that covers this occupancy permit and everything.
How does the city stop a solicitor calling you on your phone to buy?
It's not so much stopping the solicitor. These are people, often they're people from higher markets like California, New York,
I'm aware
just looking for investment property.
You know how many
So
of those I
it
get a
might-
day?
So,
You know how many of those I get a day? About
Okay.
50.
right, so if we had a policy to make sure that the way Ferguson does our housing policy, that it's not, it just encourages local ownership, even if it's a rental property. I mean, there's ways that can be done. I'm sure that Rachel probably has some ideas about that.
Okay, we just got
But
one
let
more
me just-
person.
So I just want to add, Rachel,
I
this is
know,
my last
yeah.
question. Policies like these, I think really you got staff people to do that. I just wanted to know if, to draft these initial policies, so then you can work out the difference. So is the essence of this policy something, a framework you could draft it? And is it or were you consulted enough that the bill as
That's
is
why we're here
is something
tonight.
you're comfortable with?
I did not draft it, and we had discussions, after I think the initial, this even before it came to a public meeting, because they get sent the agenda packets in advance. But I think I was consulted after that.
Okay, I just generally, you have staff, and I think this is a perfect way to use staff to draft these kind of bills, and I just want to encourage the council to do that.
Thank you, Ms. Cassandra. And
Time
our
for
very
council.
last person on 7302,
Erica Brooks.
Ms. Brooks.
Good evening.
Good evening.
A lot of the things that I wanted to talk about, we kind of addressed a little bit, but when it comes to the part about the location and the zoning, I know when the lady had the daycare, you had to rezone. Her being able to have that in their location because it was a residential area. To have a particular location and the different wards for Airbnbs or short-term rentals or however we want to name it. I mean, I don't see a problem with that for people to actually know that's what that is. I mean, why would it, unless it's a safe house, where you're trying to like hide somebody out and make sure somebody's protected or whatever. But as far as advertising business, why wouldn't you have that in a particular area so that you wouldn't have to worry about a noise ordinance? Because that's where things are happening at. That's where the Airbnb is at. That's where the short-term renters are at. When it comes to parking, it sounds great to say, hey, you can only have 3 cars. But I know in my neighborhood, we have, family mainly on the whole block. So they're gonna like have parties, they have all kind of different events or whatever. But it sounds nice to say, well, you can have 2 cars and I'll park 3 miles away. That sounds crazy. Even if you got like a wedding going on, everybody gonna show up and they're gonna park somewhere in front of somebody's house. So that's why I say if you have it zoned in a particular area, you wouldn't have to worry about people being concerned about where you're parking at unless they have a particular house and the owner saying, well, you can only park your car. They have a network of short-term renter owners and say, hey, well, this is where we're gonna designate a parking area for our visitors. So you can rationalize, they can particularly rationalize that parking issue out. You know, they can come together as a network of homeowners and say, hey, as far as noise, it's like you were saying, as far as Clayton and whoever else, if they have a particular zone that they work together and say, hey, you can come here. When you apply to live in, stay in our house for 5 days, 30 days, or whatever, how many days that the limit's gonna be, this is what we as a community do in this area. So it wouldn't be a huge thing as the regular resident having to worry about any of that, you know? When it comes to the person applying for the house, you know, to be able to rent short-term, whether it's employment, whether it's a party or whatever it is, I would think that you will have some kind of a real-time app amongst the staff, amongst the law enforcement, amongst the police department. Just like I had to stay in Airbnb or however you want to call it for a little while because some work that had to be done on the house I live in. We had to stay there for about, you know, almost a month. But the thing about it was when we got there, we had to call the company and say, hey, we had to call and get a certain number in order to get into the place. We couldn't just like walk in there. You had to get a particular code to punch in on the door to get in. And when you were leaving, you had to let them know that you were leaving by calling them and saying, hey, we leaving. So that could be a situation where you know when they leaving and when they, because if they don't say, they apply and say, well, hey, I'm staying here 5 days and you haven't heard anything, law enforcement ain't heard nothing, public works ain't heard nothing. What are these people at? Are they still there? So you're able to locate them and know these people are gone. So if you got somebody that's hard, you know, I'm not hard, but you know, person that stays, they're like, what do you call them people? I forgot, brain for, that like sit in your house, you know, squatters. If it's somebody that's outside of the person that has applied for that house and say, and they're squatting in that house, hey, we know this is out of order, something ain't right. So if you have some kind of a real-time app that you all can create, or maybe already have, that everybody in the whole department, the whole city, on all levels, can know what's going on with that thing. And then you all as a council can be able to know what's going on, and know which homeowners are following your rules and regulations. You know, and do it like you do, when you all come up here and somebody want to apply for liquor license, y'all go through a whole realm of voting who can get it and who can't. So you'll know exactly if these homeowners are following the rules, or they're here to actually comply with the codes and ordinances and make sure their houses are looking the way they should, or providing for their people that are actually signing up for these houses. You know, are they disturbing the neighborhoods? Are they a drug dealer? Are they gonna bring, you know, sit here and say, well, I'm gonna pay you some money to stay in your place, but I'm gonna conduct business as usual for my business, whether it's trafficking, human trafficking, whether it's drug dealing or just a regular party. They're enjoying themselves. But they've actually just paid for this. Hey, I paid your city to stay here. So why can't I use it for what I want it for? So those are some things that when you're talking about traffic control and knowing who's what and where, you can also, if you want to make it a community thing, like I said, like we're having this special meeting or whatever, you can include the neighborhood associations to be able to associate with the homeowners to know what's going on in that community, to make it a community thing. You know, to, like Linda said, inviting people over to the houses or for a party or whatever it is, you can invite the community, neighborhood associations to make it a business network. Y'all got a special business district. So I mean, like, why not make it a business thing to where you can make it a community thing? Inclusion. You know, not just making it to where, like y'all talk about making it secluded to where you don't know what's in your neighborhood. I mean, why wouldn't you all present this? Why would we have 21 short-term rentals already in our neighborhoods and we have no clue if those are some of the problems that we have in our neighborhood? We don't even know that. So why wouldn't it be that we have this thing put on the city council's agenda to make it a public thing, so when you all do have people that come through here and wanna have their home, legally have their home, go along with what y'all talking about, we consider these city councilmen and say, "Oh, okay, they gonna have 5 of them things right there in our neighborhood, so we can know and understand what's really happening. Not saying it's just some new person that moved in, but no, they're there for a short term. And we know, okay, we can expect whatever they got going on, whether it's a day thing or a weekend thing. You know, and that's all in safety to know who's in your neighborhood and why. And that's all going down also with the whole thing of different people coming in from different countries right about now. And then you saying that you don't want to have a compliance rule to know what's going on and who's living in the places. You can have 20 to 30 people that are from some other country that's in one house. Yeah, it could be possibly for employment. But we don't know, like I said, it could be human trafficking. We don't know. So, you know, all these things are lined up with each other, but in order to include us, which is good to have this meeting here tonight to know what everybody's kind of like thinking and put ideas out there. But when it comes to safety, and first of all, thinking about us, these about the people that you want to keep here in Ferguson, let us know what's going on so that we can know how to address the people or welcome the people that's coming here to Ferguson to live or just stay here for a short term.
Thank you, Ms. Klein.
Ms.
Ms. Brooks.
I'm sorry. No, hold on. Oh, also, when it comes to the kind of knowing what's going on, why isn't there like maybe an annual or like quarterly meeting about the different types of people that are coming in? Like I was saying, like the business people, the homeowners, the people that are like, let's say for instance, if you have a big business that come through here, like right now, we about to have a Super Bowl come through here. And you got Airbnbs that's local right about now. And they might have a big, huge crowd that might want to stay in one of these Airbnbs or whatever. And then you have like they're like annual clients, not just, you know, for a weekend. Why not have a business meeting with these people to know, okay, these are the regular folks that come through Ferguson that bring money here, you know, they're partners with the city and they're written out these short-term things, you know, kind of understand the relationship part of it and not just have people just coming here just to hang out and then be gone. But like you say, bring about a community atmosphere.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, thank you. You all want to stay a couple more minutes?
I had a question for Ms. Brew.
Oh, okay. Councilman Palmer, then Councilwoman Noor. And then we're gonna close. I know we did not get to the other ordinance, but this is good. Councilman Palmer.
Ms. Brooks, you mentioned something about people coming from other countries moving here and knowing who they are.
Mhm.
Are you implying that we should condition occupancy permits on national origin?
I think that's what you said. I didn't say that.
What did you say?
No, I didn't say nothing about that being, see, you know what, if you can recall several city council meetings, I asked the city council as well as the chief here about, is there some place that we can actually go and know who's in our neighborhood, right? That's what I'm asking, who are here? That's what I asked. So when
But you mentioned something about people from other countries.
to sound like it's racist or discriminatory, or I'm trying to keep certain people out, that's the wrong perspective to bring.
I didn't
to
say
this
that.
platform. I mean, that's the way you put it.
I was asking
So
you
you're
the
saying-
context behind your question about 30 people from a different country moving here.
I ain't said nothing about 30. I didn't
Yes,
put
you
a number
did.
on it. I didn't put a number on it. That was a hypothetical.
You said 30.
It don't matter. But the thing about it is, I'm saying this right here. When it comes to the demographics that are on the census, that they have a whole lot of Black people that's here, right? See, and a lot of times at this point, it's dealing with the people that participated in the census. And the people that didn't participate, we don't know who they are that's here. So, but right about now, as you watch the news, you know, CNN, all the C-SPAN, whatever channel you want to pick, you got a lot of people, immigrants, you have a lot of people that have come here illegally and they're sitting in our neighborhoods. We don't know. I see people from different countries walking the streets all the time.
If the
So,
government.
I'm talking to him. So I'm just saying, when it comes to signing up for a short-term rental, and we don't know who the city is allowing to apply for these homes, and as Nick said, hey, they're in your neighborhood right now. We don't know, it's 21 of them as far as what I heard, that's already up in here already. We have no clue what neighborhood they're in. You all have not told us, we can't go to a certain particular location on the website to know exactly what's, to my sunshine and some stuff, that's what I'm talking about. You can't sunshine something you don't know about. So if we don't have a clue as to who in our neighborhood and who the homeowners are that are allowing these people to be in these houses, whether they're for short-term rental or whatever, and they reapply the next month, or maybe they might have somebody in that group that's 21 and say, hey, well, now you apply this time. So you standing here for that long with the same people. So it's a matter of not just talking about the specifics of just another person from another country, but we need to know who is here. So if they're Japanese, if they're Mexican, if they're whoever, it does not matter. If they're African, it does not matter. We need to know who they are. If they're white, from whatever nationality, Ireland, you know, some European, it don't matter.
Norway.
All of them places, Sweden, all of them.
Afghanistan.
So while y'all being sarcastic up there and all this, see, you need to be thinking about what I'm saying. So while you not understanding, it's a matter of public safety to know who is in your neighborhood. That's my point. So like I said, when y'all talking about the perspective of how many people can stay in there and it can double, and people just like I say, people are on the run for their lives to survive in this world.
Thank you.
So I'm just saying, we got to know who's in our neighborhood.
Okay, the councilwoman.
My
Noel-
question
No,
is,
stop it.
my question is regarding C, the occupancy permit required. C, interior compliance. A short-term rental shall obtain a certificate of interior compliance within 30 days prior to issuance of an initial occupancy permit and every 3 years. Can we change it to every year instead of every 3 years? Annually instead of every 3 years?
And to know who their people, it's just like when people apply for like a green card or whatever, they're gonna know, like when you at the airport, they ask you, what's your business? What's your business here? You don't just walk in America and you from another country or just doing some business and you from somewhere else and say, what is your business here? When you get ready to step in that airport, talking about you coming to America, they wanna know why you here. So we can clearly understand, okay, these people that are staying in this house, staying there, not for just parties or for entertainment, they're there for living. Okay, so we'll know, the city will know, even if we don't have the right to know, because we can't sunshine something that we don't know about. The city will know, these people are here, this group of people are here for living arrangements to be able, like you said, a nurse that a person that had a house for nurses that come through here, same thing I'm saying. We'll know in particular if this group of people are here legally and they're here for employment, or if they're here for whatever other personal issues they may have that they want it for. Because they are the homeowners.
Okay,
My
thank you,
personal,
Ms. Brooks.
my personal opinion is it's none of our business why somebody's in Ferguson.
That's nobody's business.
Going good, we were
I
going
mean, he took it there. He took it there from a perspective of me trying to be racist on what I'm saying. I'm not saying that from. I'm seeing people from different nationalities walking our neighborhoods, walking not only
Where do
just
you want
on the
them
side.
to go?
See, look, you know what? Look,
Come
it ain't
on,
that serious.
come on, you
Whoa,
all.
whoa, whoa, wait. Oh my gosh, is not the answer. You act like stuff is unreal. We got people here from different countries. You must have watched the news.
Oh, I
mean,
don't.
You live in Ferguson. I don't know, but anyway, my point is that, like I said, from a not, you see what I'm saying? That's why we need to vote y'all up out of here. Because you all, this is
All
not a
right,
joke.
it's
Wait a minute, hold
it's
up, Mayor.
enough.
Mayor, no,
Motion to
this is
adjourn.
not a joke. This is serious. Why you, oh my gosh, and as my city council lady,
Yes.
you should be listening to
You
me,
are
not
questioning
looking
nationalities of people
everybody
wanting
question
to
no
come
nationality.
Miss Brooks.
No, you should be
Miss
talking to her,
Brooks.
because the thing about it, they're trying to pick me out. Because I said,
What?
because I
Okay,
had
let-
mentioned a certain reason.
Let's get some order. Come on, let's get
This
some order.
is out of order right here.
Let's get some order.
It's out of order for our council people to
Let's
sit
get
here
some
and
order.
giggle about some stuff that doesn't make sense.
Miss Brooks,
It's a real situation. So
Miss
I was saying
Brooks.
that we have people here, since they brought it up, I mean, they brought it to me.
Do you
Okay.
have any more
No,
questions?
all I'm saying, I have a statement to make.
No.
No, excuse me. That's
Miss
exactly why,
Brooks,
like I
what
said,
statement do you have?
my statement is this. Like I said before, why you all wanna, demean my character or the judge what I'm saying? You should be thinking it through before you look like that. My point is, like I said, when you have, like you just had a shooting over there on that parking lot over there, you don't know what's going on with the people in our neighborhood. No matter if they look black, cause you just kind of assume, oh, they just some young black folks, so we expect that out of young black people. But when it comes to somebody else from another country or somebody else from another space that you have no clue, being that you council people, you might have that knowledge or be privy of who's here in our city. But as far as us, well, maybe that's not what you want. But as a city, a person that lives here, as a person that lives here, maybe I can talk to the chief. He understands my understanding of public safety, to understand the whole thing of knowing the place the people are, because you all want this business in our neighborhood where we live at. So I'm just asking if you might drive. He's out of order. I'm talking to
Miss
the chief right
Brooks,
now.
yeah, he's out of order. And he knows,
He tell me I'm out of line. He's out of order.
Okay, Miss Brooks, could you
So-
wrap it up,
So,
please?
like I'm saying, I'm talking to the chief right now, because he seems to be the only person not laughing and not taking this as a joke. Because like I said, when you want people to just purchase homes in our neighborhood, and you constantly talking about having to use the chief for unsafe situations. But when you don't know who is in these houses, and they're trying to make it a point to understand that that's one reason why we don't know. Because you don't bring it to us as a community to be able to, like you say, with liquor license, come up here and judge people to say, okay, they're okay. That's like I said, they could be a drug dealer or a human trafficker that wants to rent out a home in our neighborhood, and we have no clue where these houses are. We don't know how to go onto Sunshine to be able to know where the current
Okay,
houses are.
Ms. Brooks,
Miss Brooks.
I just want to tell you real quick, right now, you don't know who's in those short-term rentals. This bill will make it where the ownership of the short-term rentals is on record publicly. You will be able to go to the OpenGov site and put in an address and see if there's a short-term rental license. And if there's ever a problem, there will now be a requirement for those owners to keep track of who's in those houses. So right now, we got nothing. This bill makes it where we can do exactly what you want to
So
do.
will
And
you
that's
be
why I
able to-
put this bill in here, because we.
I'm checking these people to know what, you should.
I mean,
check
you
your
don't
head
know who
out.
checks into a hotel room every night,
See, but
but
if
you
you-
know who owns the hotel
But see,
and they're
look, you talking about
responsible.
30
That's
days
what this bill
before.
does.
But you're talking about a neighborhood, a residential area, where you talking about, you don't want to zone a certain area out for whatever, but we talking about our safety, you're not putting this in a business location to where whatever's happening in that business zone, that's business. But when you just dropping the whole, whatever you want to call it, short-term thing in the neighborhood next to your house, and everybody's up here, and you don't know who they are, what they place them.
So,
They could be,
okay,
they
Miss,
could be, sexual offenders, you don't know.
So let me acknowledge you, because what you're saying, I'm getting it now. When you first started saying it, I'm gonna be very honest with you, I heard you being segregating people out.
No, I'm not. No.
Okay, so as you talk more, I'm starting to get it, and I acknowledge your concerns. What I would point out to you is that your concerns can happen anywhere. You can have those same concerns about a sexual offender, a child, whatever you wanna call it. Any house in your neighborhood could have those concerns. So you have to be very careful as you're saying these things, that you're not eliminating freedom.
But they're
from the
registered,
people.
sexual offenders are registered, so
I
you can know
understand that.
that.
We're not talking about that. You gotta remember too, everything you're concerned about, you as a human being should be concerned about that for
Okay.
rentals, for home ownership, for short-term rentals, all of that. Short-term rentals currently have no ordinance maintaining them at all. They fall under ordinances, as Rachel has pointed out tonight, that are in different pieces.
Mhm.
And as she's pointed out, we can start pulling that information together, correct?
And
we
that's what I'm
can
trying to do
start-
for you all
Let
to
me
get
finish. I
the
let you finish.
information that y'all
Let me
need.
finish. I let you finish.
Yeah.
So we start pulling those things together. Councilman Cassoff, Councilman Palmer finally got this started. Something I want to do, I don't have the way of writing that they do. So when they brought this up, awesome. I have a lot of questions because there are a lot of details that I didn't see in it. But as we've done this discussion tonight, I'm feeling more comfortable, and I also feel like the tweaks that he's gonna make, the tweaks that Rachel can suggest, the tweaks that Dave Musgrave's already suggested, will make this a very strong bill. And it'll be very protective for 1% of the rentals in this community. Keep that in mind. Everything that you were bringing to the table, all of your fears, all of your concerns, everybody in this room has those concerns too. And you need to remember what we're talking, and I'm not saying this to be disrespectful. You need to remember what we're talking about. We're not talking about all the rentals. We're talking about 1%.
I didn't say all the rentals.
I know you didn't. I'm saying it.
Mm-hmm.
1%.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mayor, that is all I have to say.
Oh,
Ms.
okay.
Brooks, thank you
Was
for your
my
time.
change heard?
Excuse me?
Was my change heard? I asked.
Yeah, they heard your
Did you hear it?
changes.
Yeah.
He
Okay.
heard the change. Thank you, Ms. Brooks.
Mhm.
Thank you.
All that thing is.
Thank you. At this point, let's conclude Bill 7302. You was the last person speaking on 7302. The council people have taken all of everybody questions and comments in consideration, along with Miss Rachel. She has taken it. They will work it out and come back next week.
Thank you.
You gotta be 7 days. I'm sorry. 7 days. We gotta have 7 days within it. Now, if you have any more questions, please send your questions to the city clerk and she will pass them on to the council people. We did not get to Bill 7204, which is the sunshine bill. We're gonna leave that where it is, and next week we'll talk about it. At this point, I will entertain a motion and a second to adjourn.
Can I ask a quick question before we end? How many people were on the list for the second conversation?
That's another meeting. Okay.
You know what, send them.
Yeah, yeah.
And send them tomorrow.
Okay, send your emails out if you have anything on the sunshine law, okay? It has been properly moved and second that we adjourn. All in favor? Any opposed? Ayes have it. It was a great meeting.
I'm sorry.
I know.
Sorry.
No, you didn't want to.
I love it.